It's kind of become a tradition for me now, every couple of years, to go back and rewatch the Assassin's Creed movie that was released in 2016. The last time I watched this movie was about 2.5 years ago. I made a video on it for when I hit 40,000 subscribers, but since I just made a video on the Assassin's Creed live-action Netflix series and what's been happening with that, I felt motivated to return to this movie once again. Now, the Assassin's Creed movie, for context, came out at a time where good video game live-action adaptations were very rare. I mean, they still kind of are. However, I think many people who've played Assassin's Creed would agree that these stories could make for good movies or TV series. There's a lot of potential in that idea, and that's because the core concept and premise of Assassin's Creed is appealing to a lot of people. Witnessing an ancestor's memories in the past as an assassin from the modern day, creating this really unique blend of sci-fi and history. This movie was also released in 2016, which was an off year for the games. Syndicate came out in 2015 and had underwhelming sales, so Ubisoft took 2016 off to put some more polish and focus onto the next entry, which would be Assassin's Creed Origins in 2017. But to tie fans over, since 2016 would be the first year since 2008 to not have an annual Assassin's Creed game, we got this movie instead. And this was not some cheap, cash grab, lazily put together movie by a bunch of nobodies. No, this movie had a large budget, some big names attached to it, and a very promising premise. I remember how excited people were about an Assassin's Creed story in the Spanish Inquisition. And yet, despite all this movie seemingly had going for it, it was ultimately a failure. Now, I know a lot of people do actually like this movie. I really don't think it's that bad. There's a lot of cool stuff in it. But when you look at it from the critics and audience ratings and box office performance, this movie was a failure. I mean, it got an 18 from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't love this movie, but there's no way it's an 18%. That's a ridiculously low score. The film had a budget of $125 million, which is a lot, obviously, and only made $240 million at the box office, which you might think is a profit, but it's not, because there's a lot more that goes into a movie than just the production budget, like advertising and everything. And for a movie to be considered a box office success, it usually needs to make around 2.5 to 3 times the budget. It was estimated that the movie lost the studio around $75 to $100 million, and that's probably why we haven't seen an Assassin's Creed movie since. In fact, if this movie had done well, there were plans to make even more films after it. So what was the problem? Why what should have been an easy home run end up underperforming so severely? Well, we need to take it back to the beginning. This movie was first conceived all the way back in 2011. That's right, this idea of an Assassin's Creed movie was in talks before Assassin's Creed Revelations had even come out. Assassin's Creed was popular then, of course, but still nowhere near as popular as it is now, or even when this movie came out. So it's clear Ubisoft knew very early on the kind of potential a movie like this had. But what I found very interesting was that Michael Fassbender, the star of the movie, a Golden Globe winner and 2-time Oscar nominee, was announced to be the star of the Assassin's Creed movie in 2012, which I find interesting because they casted him before the movie had even been written and his character was created. Now, Michael Fassbender is a great actor. When it was learned he would star in the movie, a lot of people got really excited, and having a big name like his attached to this movie definitely drummed up some more interest. He was also a producer on the movie, so he had quite a lot of involvement, and I think his performance is good in this. He of course plays both Cal, the modern day protagonist, and Aguilar, our past assassin. However, he doesn't get a lot of opportunity to really showcase his skills as an actor in this movie. I think his best scene was actually right at the beginning where Cal is being executed. You can feel the sheer panic and fear from him knowing he's about to die. But outside of these few moments, there's not a ton of opportunity for him to really show what he can do, as Cal is a fairly stoic character. Well, except for this.
You have to stay with Aguilar. Stay in sync with
yeah, I don't know what happened here. Fassbender wasn't even the only well-known and respected name in this film either. Marion Cotillard played Sophia, an Academy Award-winning actress, and her father was played by Jeremy Irons. They even got Brendan Gleeson to play Cal's dad. This is actually a really stacked cast, and I felt they all did well with what they were given. Anyways though, the reason this movie took until 2016 to release, despite being conceived all the way back in 2011, was because it underwent multiple rewrites. The original script was written by Michael Leslie, then it was rewritten by Scott Frank, and then rewritten again by Adam Cooper and Bill Collage. Anytime I see something has been rewritten multiple times before production, it's usually a major red flag. Justin Kurzel was hired to be the film's director, and the movie was filmed in late 2015. Again, this movie had a lot going for it, from the budget, to the cast, to the source material. Not to mention, you already had a large fan base in the Assassin's Creed community that would be there to see it on opening night. It seemed like a recipe for success, and yet, it still failed. And that really has to do with the movie itself. I believe this is now my third or fourth time watching it. Like I said, I usually watch it every few years, and I never thought this was a bad movie. I by no means think it's great, but I found the hate for it to be a bit overblown. As an Assassin's Creed story, I feel it does a relatively decent job of getting across some of the main themes of the franchise, with the Assassin and Templar conflict, and free will versus societal control debate, the Apple of Eden, the modern day storyline with Abstergo, using the Animus to find the apple. In the opening scene, we get to see Aguilar be inducted as an assassin and the ring finger sacrifice. There's plenty of references and nods to the games. There are a few changes from the source material, but nothing too egregious like what other video game adaptations have done. Overall, it's a pretty faithful adaptation, even if it is telling an original story. And I really don't think it's that bad. Again, certainly not bad enough to deserve an 18% critic score. Then again, this may feel like an incredibly convoluted mess for those who aren't familiar with Assassin's Creed, which may explain why the critic score is so low in comparison to the audience. But if I had to give this movie a score out of 10, I'd probably give it a 6. Not bad, not great, it's fine. There's a lot of things I really like in this movie, but overall, I think it could have been a lot better. One thing I feel really holds this movie back though is the rating. I understand that Ubisoft and Sony probably thought that making this movie PG-13 would make it more accessible to a wider audience and for the younger kids who play Assassin's Creed, but this movie honestly has no business being PG-13. The games are rated M. They're a lot more violent and uncensored than this movie. I understand video game ratings and movie ratings aren't directly comparable, but chances are most people who are mature enough to play these games would be mature enough to see an R-rated AC movie. I think the rating really holds back this movie a lot and scales back the more brutal nature of the games. I'm hoping they learned from this and the Netflix series has a more mature rating, because this movie has some awesome action sequences that would be even better if it wasn't scaling back to try and fit in the PG-13 rating. But speaking of action, that's one of the best parts of this movie. The action choreography is phenomenal. It's fast-paced, it's creative, it's incredibly flashy. I felt these sequences really captured the spirit of the games. In fact, I think my favorite part of the movie is that long action sequence starting at Aguilar's execution site. You get to see lots of combat, parkour, a chase, the leap of faith. It perfectly encapsulated so much of what Assassin's Creed is about, and it really made me wish there was more of that in this movie. Granted, I do think the way some of the fights are filmed and edited does make it a little difficult to even tell what's happening because it's cutting around so quick, but overall, I love the action in this movie. It's for sure its biggest strength. From a visual standpoint, this is a beautiful movie too. There are so many great shots, the costumes, the set design, even a lot of the effects I thought looked great. I mean, you would hope that's the case in a $125 million movie, but still impressive nonetheless. But one of the biggest issues I and many others have with this movie is there isn't enough focus on the past storyline with Aguilar, which to be fair is kind of tricky because you have the entire modern day day element to the story as well, which in the movie is really the main focus. So all the stuff with Aguilar and the Spanish Inquisition really just gets pushed to the background. In the games, it's like a 90-10 split. About 90% of the story is focused on the past storyline, while it's about 10% on the modern day storyline. Obviously, it's not like that in every game, but I'm mostly referring to the original games here. But in this movie, it's the exact opposite. It's about 90% modern day with Cal, and 10% in the Spanish Inquisition with Aguilar. Which is disappointing, because the setting and Aguilar as a character I find super interesting. Obviously, the modern day stuff is very important too. You can't really just exclude it from the movie, since it's such an important foundational part of the story, and the movie has to take so much time establishing it and how the Animus works, for those who aren't familiar with Assassin's Creed. But then you're hardly putting any focus on what people love the most about Assassin's Creed. The actual Assassin's Creed, the history, and seeing these hooded figures with hidden blades hunting down Templars. Sure, people still like the modern day stuff, but that's not the main reason why people like this series. So it felt like a mistake to put the most focus on that in the movie, when it really should have been the opposite. The main focus should have been on Aguilar and the Spanish Brotherhood. I think Aguilar literally only has like 3 or 4 lines in this entire movie, which is just a shame because he seems really interesting and has some badass looking assassin robes. I know there's some novels that explore all this stuff from the movie more, but it's something that should have been a heavier focus in the film to begin with. I wouldn't even be opposed to one day having a game with Aguilar in Spain, because that character had a lot of wasted potential. Overall, I don't think the modern day stuff is horrible. It was cool seeing a little bit more of the Abstergo operations, although it does kind of feel like your generic sci-fi movie at times. They also changed the Animus from this to whatever this is. I guess they wanted to spice up the Animus a bit, so it would look more interesting when Cal is reliving Aguilar's memories in the present. Not really sure if it's a necessary change, but at least they didn't make too many major changes to the source material. Another issue I have with the movie though, is they place so much importance on the Apple of Eden, but never actually show what it can do. I mean, they're constantly talking about how powerful it is, and how it will change the world with its extreme capabilities. Then they finally find the apple, and never actually use it. How are you gonna talk about it for that long, and tease its power, and then never actually show it to the audience? That's extremely underwhelming, and they definitely could have found a way to display its power, while still having the assassins win in the end. I'll never forget the first time I saw what the apple could do in AC1, when Al-Mualim used it at Masyaf, and while sure we understand what the apple is capable of, even without seeing it be used, those who aren't fans of Assassin's Creed don't really know besides what the characters directly tell you. And that's another thing. So much of the dialogue in this movie is exposition. I get it, it's Assassin's Creed, there's a lot of information and context it needs to establish and tell the audience to make them understand in only 2 hours, but this movie's solution to this was just to have Cal act as a surrogate for the audience, and have every character in the movie explain everything to him. I mean, you even have a text crawl at the beginning of the movie to tell you the premise. You can keep a little bit of mystery to it. You don't have to explain everything to the audience outright. In AC1, you slowly put the pieces together over the course of the game with Desmond. You don't get all the answers right away, and that's what made it so mysterious and alluring. I'll give the movie credit though. While the modern day stuff wasn't perfect, the story was still better than some of the game's modern day storylines. It still doesn't really compete with the original game's modern day story with Desmond though. But even though I have some big issues with this movie, all in all, I really don't think it's as awful as so many people and critics made it out to be. I've seen it multiple times now, and I can still enjoy it for what it is. Hopefully Ubisoft learned a lot from this movie that they can apply to their future live-action Assassin's Creed projects, because there's just so much potential in that. But as always, that's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think about the Assassin's Creed movie, and whether or not you feel Ubisoft should give another go at it in the future. Obviously, I know we have the Netflix series in the works, but I wouldn't be surprised if Assassin's Creed returned to the big screen eventually. As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like, and consider subscribing subscribing to the channel if you're new, and other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day, Assassins.